Okay, let's talk about imposter. Okay, let's talk about imposter syndrome. This is talked about a lot in different ways, and I think it is specifically talked about in popular culture differently than I have seen it manifest as a musician. Okay, Google defines imposter syndrome as a psychological phenomenon characterized by persistent self-doubt and feelings of inadequacy, despite evidence of one's achievements. Now, if you are new to a situation, like you get a new job, you're in a new ensemble, you are performing in a different place, you are performing a new piece, you are performing in a different capacity than you normally do, these feelings are extremely human and normal. And I think giving it the name imposter syndrome, it's not actually like a condition, it's just feeling inadequate. Now, the thing that I think musicians don't realize is their capacity is just how qualified they are in any given situation. If you go into music, you have likely been playing your instrument since you were, 8 to 11 years old, right? I started the flute when I was 8, but I took piano lessons at 6 and then started violin at 4, right? Like there's so much history there. And I had been feeling feelings of imposter syndrome, questioning whether I could play my instrument well, questioning if I was good enough through my doctoral degree. And I graduated with that when I was 28. So there's so much that plays into this that I think is just more extreme than, well, I got these degrees. Why do I still feel like I'm not qualified? So let's talk about why musicians get all the degrees, they win competitions, they even win some auditions, they get certain jobs, or they get professor jobs, and then they still feel like it isn't enough. They don't feel good enough, and they don't know why that is. Now, I'm a mindset coach for musicians. My name is Chelsea. I am a flutist, and I help people with this stuff every day. And when I am coaching people, I always look for the cause rather than treating like the symptoms of whatever it is. So you're not feeling very good, take a walk, take some deep breaths. It's like, no, why aren't you feeling good? Let's get to the bottom of it. So today we're getting to the bottom of imposter syndrome. Now, of course, this can apply to anybody, literally anybody, because you don't need to be a musician to experience this. But I want to talk about the motivation behind long-term goals, behind careers, and behind how you motivate yourself to show up every single day and do your work. Now, this is one of the most universal things that I think humans experience, but people are sort of surprised when we talk about it openly. But it's this feeling of not being good enough, this loop that plays on repeat in our head. Sometimes we have learned, not with our own permission, our brain learns without our permission all the time. Sometimes we learn that we are not good enough and we have to prove our worth, whether that was instilled in us in childhood through countless private music lessons with a teacher who wasn't careful, or whatever it might be. We feel the need to prove ourselves when we don't believe we are good enough. Our thoughts, when repeated, become beliefs. So if you hold the belief that you're not good enough, and that is motivating you enough, and you feel inadequate, so much so that you're taking all this action to try to prove yourself, then what you're doing is motivating yourself with negativity, honestly, but you're motivating yourself through the lens of inadequacy. Or you're just trying to dig yourself out of a hole. Meanwhile, you are using the shovel of not good enough. You are digging yourself deeper into that hole, because every single time that you practice the thought, I'm not good enough, you dig a little bit deeper. Even if you are working and actioning so hard to try to prove that belief wrong. That's why you can get your doctorate, you can get a professor job, you can win an orchestra audition, you can do all of these things and still feel like an imposter, because internally you maybe haven't taken care of building yourself up. Now, some people talk about imposter syndrome when they're like starting a new thing, when they're trying to put YouTube videos out into the world, for example, right? This isn't exactly what I'm talking about. This is someone who is an expert, who has spent most of their life and brain power devoted to this one thing, and they still feel like it isn't enough and it's not good enough. And therefore, they're not good enough. I know this because this is exactly how I felt. I had won an orchestra job. I had been a university professor. I had my doctorate, and I was still questioned, can I play this? I didn't trust myself. I still felt like, should I be here? Should I be the one chosen? Do I deserve this? There's no amount of practicing that is going to change your mind. I'm going to say that again. There is no amount of practicing that is going to change your mind unless you pick up a ladder instead of a shovel and climb out yourself. So if you want to eliminate imposter syndrome, the first step is going inward. How am I motivating myself? Am I trying to prove myself? Am I telling myself I'm not good enough? And if so, that's not a problem. Now you know. That's amazing. The first step is awareness. Second step, observation. How often does it come up in your mind? And notice it. It's sort of, I notice that this is happening. Let me see all the instances where it does happen. Not to judge myself, but just to notice and be ready. So maybe I can make a different choice. Maybe I can mentally reroute myself. So instead of thinking I'm not good enough, or oh my gosh, people are going to judge me, or oh my gosh, people are going to think these 10 things that I made up in my own brain, but I'm projecting on other people, and they're actually my own thoughts about me, but I just blame them on other people because that's a little bit easier than owning the fact that I actually don't have a lot of confidence. Anyway, that was real talk. I had to say it. So first step, awareness. Second step, observe your mind. What is it telling you? It's an organ that learns stuff. It's the same as like your stomach, right? Your body learns stuff about the world. Your brain is part of your body. And if you think that you are your brain, we have to make that disconnection because your brain is there for your survival. And in this modern day world where you're trying to play, I don't know, a flute on a stage in front of a bunch of people, that's not what we were designed for. We were designed to live in groups of like 100 people in the wilderness until agriculture was invented, right? Like this is not what our genetic makeup was meant to do. So we can feel a lot like we're fighting with ourselves. And if we don't have the awareness of what our brain is thinking, and we don't have an understanding of when that comes up, we are never going to be able to make that change in our mind. Okay, so awareness, observation, then neutrality. Look, you cannot go from 0 to 100, right? I'm not going to go from I'm not good enough to I'm the most worthy person, I'm amazing, I'm the best. It's probably not going to happen overnight. What we want to do is go neutral. So we can state our observation of I'm having the thought that XYZ. Okay, that's neutral. Then implement a neutral thought. I play the flute. So neutral, oh my God. It's so true. I definitely play the flute. That is believable. Come up with your own facts. And then every time you notice yourself, okay, I'm a human in a room making sound waves. That is neutral. That feels so much better than I suck at the flute, right? Like that's so much better. We want a little bit better so we can get relief from the emotional pain that those thoughts are causing us. Then when we practice the neutral thoughts and feelings, we reroute them, we get to calm our nervous system a little bit, then we get to implement better thoughts. This is a gradual process. It's not like a quick fix overnight thing, but I think that it's so important to de-escalate those thoughts that are making us feel consistently inadequate. Okay, now, then once the neutral thought becomes your baseline, you get to start implementing better thoughts because then it's a little bit more possible to believe. We need to create wiggle room here, right? Then you can start thinking more positively. If you think positive affirmations right now are not believable and you are just like really resisting them, I totally get it. Totally been there myself. I'm like, what am I going to think? I'm the best flute player in the whole world when I think that I'm terrible? Absolutely not. So if you can't go 0 to 100, totally normal. Try this middle ground of neutrality. It'll give you some relief. You'll start to implement this habit of speaking neutrally about like what's actually going on. If you want to zoom out, I really recommend this. Be like, I'm a human in the world making sound waves in a room through like a metal pipe. Do you know what I mean? Like that's all I'm actually doing. Like, why am I tying my self-worth up into this? If we can zoom out, it's so much easier to then give ourselves some like compassion and honestly think about how much of a silly goose our brain is being in those moments. Another way I think is really the secret to self-confidence and overcoming this imposter syndrome and really deepening your relationship with yourself is the ability to process emotions. Meaning, if you get really good at feeling your feelings and processing your emotions, nothing is really going to scare you that much, because whatever we're scared of, we're not afraid of being inadequate because someone else thinks it. We're afraid of how it's going to feel. We're afraid of feeling, always. If we're not in a physically life-threatening situation, all of our fears are always coming from what are we afraid of feeling? And if you have not gotten good at processing emotions and you don't even know where to start, I have a video linked here, tells you my 5-step process for exactly how to do that. And if you get really good at that, you're not going to be afraid of failure, because you know it just means that you're going to feel uncomfortable for a day, right? You know you're not going to be afraid to feel inadequate because you've done that before, and you know it doesn't mean anything about you. Emotions are not you. Your thoughts are not you. And the more we can zoom out and observe and see that, the less we feel like an imposter, because we all know we're just like humans bopping around on the planet. What? I don't even know. What are we even doing here? Zoom out that far. And I don't think we do that enough in our daily life. So we get caught up in believing that our self-worth is dependent on the sound waves we make in a room. That's crazy bonkers to me, right? No, your self-worth is not dependent on anything. You did not come out of the womb with a flute in your hand or whatever you do, right? You did not come into this world having to prove your worth. You don't look at a baby and be like, well, they have to play the flute and prove that they're good enough, or else what are they? That's ridiculous. We don't do that. Whenever we say these things and write them down or say them out loud, that is when we can see how silly our brain is being. And I highly recommend doing that either in a journaling exercise. And I think this is why coaching is so great, because sometimes I know I just need to say things out loud to someone else and be like, that is so silly. Can you believe that crossed my mind? So silly. And if you can laugh at yourself, it's so much better. I have this practice called the silly goose method that I'll link as well. It talks through how we can use the word silly goose and calling ourselves silly geese to rewire our brain and just be less hard on ourselves all the time. So if you are an expert at something, it could be anything, and you're feeling self-doubt and imposter syndrome and you feel like a fraud, really look at how you're thinking about yourself in the context you're thinking about yourself. So whenever I think of myself as just a flute player and that's all I can do, and that's the only thing that I'm able to do, I actually feel really bad about myself. Coaching and teaching and all of these other things that I do, I've expanded the definition of how I express myself. And for me, that takes the weight off of this all or nothing mentality that a lot of musicians go into music with. And I think in the culture, it's sort of thrown around that if you don't invest only in this one thing, if you have other skills, if you do other things, that's not wanting it enough, and that's not putting your all into it. And I think that's so harmful. And I'm tired. To be honest, I'm tired of that. Can we not? Life is too short. We need to value ourselves first as musicians in order to spread what we can do. If you try to get on a stage and you don't value yourself and you are not in love with what you are about to share with your audience, why should they be in love with what you have to share? Really think about that. I think it's so hard to put our finger on why everyone's talking about classical music dying. It's the culture. It's this imposter syndrome culture where we create scarcity of jobs. We're telling kids that they're never going to make money at this, that they're never going to be able to do it. And then, of course, they're like, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. That was me. And I wanted to prove everyone wrong that thought I wouldn't make it. So for better, for worse, I was a single track mind. And even after undergrad, master's, artist diploma, doctorate, I still felt like I wasn't good enough. And that is crazy. And the fact that this is not addressed in our teaching, and the fact that it is not only not addressed, but extraordinarily common, is baffling to me. So that'll be another video on classical music pedagogy and empowering your students. Definitely going to make a video on that. But this all stems from our self-concept. And if you want to watch a video on self-concept, you can click right here and you can check it out. I really hope that you do, because our self-concept dictates our success. It dictates what we believe is possible for us, and it absolutely manifests what is possible for us. Because if we don't think something is possible, it's not. That is why I think this imposter syndrome is so widely talked about, because if our self-concept is not at least bare minimum neutral, like I'm a person that exists in the world, neutral, then we gotta get it there, and then we can move on. But if you would like some help with this along the way, I have a school community that is full of musicians who are also working on the same thing, and I have podcast called Align Your Mind. If you want to check it out, it is all about this mindset stuff, plus being a musician / human, obviously. But if you want to check those out, feel free, and I will see you next time.